I lived with my parents and my youngest sister of 17 at the time, in a nice residential condo up in the hills. One day, after work, while I was arriving at my house, there was a strong windstorm going on. It was so strong that some of the trees fell off, and the streets were full of leaves and pine needles. When I arrived home, there were so many pine needles piled up in front of my house that I had to be careful not to trip. At the other side of the street, there is an empty lot with nothing built in, and a wall that divides my residential from another that is next to it. While I was looking into all the pine needles piled up, I realized that although I got neighbors at both sides of my house, the leaves and needles were only piled up in front of mine. I knew that no one had cleaned up their part of the street, because it was still winding hard when I arrived home. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the winding stopped, and the air seemed still for a bit. It was starting to get dark, but the lighting around my house seemed strange. That's when I felt as if someone was watching me. I started to feel sick and dizzy, and started seeing fireworks on my vision. The type you see when you're going to pass out. I've overcome some hardships in my life, and I was relatively strong-willed, so I held myself against my car and stumbled to my house door, almost passing out. Once inside my house, I laid on the floor trying to recompose myself. As I have high blood pressure since I was 16, I didn't think much about this. After several minutes staring at my door from the inside, I got up, locked the door, and went out into the night. Hours later, I was playing League of Legends with my sister, as I'm addicted to it, when I noticed some movement in the empty terrain in front of my house. It had just fell 3, but in the dark, you couldn't see very far. That's when, with letting out a gasp, I saw him. A tall white figure, with no eyes or facial features. He was wearing some form of black blazer, and there were shadows creeping from behind him. I turned to look at my sister, and called her, but when I looked back to the terrain, it was empty. I shrugged it off and asked her if she would care to sleep in my room that day, and she said okay. 1 week went on, giving me a feeling of dread every time I was around my house, but outside of it. When I arrived home in one of these days, it was still strangely clear, while the other days at the same time it was usually dark. Whilst getting my things out of my car, I turned to look at the empty terrain when I noticed a woman screaming, "Go away," and closing her windows fiercely. Her house was in the other residential condo, to the other side of the wall, where the empty lot was. I was startled for a moment and went straight to my house. I've never said anything about it to anyone, but the next day my sister came to me worried, saying that she had a nightmare while I was going crazy because I could see Slenderman. That gave me chills across my spine, and I felt dizzy again. I started explaining the last events to her, and she laughed and said there is no such thing as Slenderman, and I must be forgetting to take my blood pressure medicine, which I sometimes forget to take, but I knew that wasn't the case. The next week I had forgot all about this. While arriving home, I opened my door to my house, and a huge rodent entered my house running. It was probably like 60 centimeters tall from head to tail, and it went onto the kitchen. This rodent lives in the woods near my home, and due to amiable laws we can't kill it or send it anywhere else. I was chasing him out of my house when he jumped to a metal table we have and started gnarling at me. I screamed at him, which made him pissed off, and I swear he was about to jump at me when he stopped, looked behind me, and started to piss himself. Feeling something strange behind me, I turned to look, only to find nothing between me and the door behind me. The rat jumped off the table, fell awkwardly into the floor, and fled through a door that takes you outside in the back of my home. My sister was startled by the whole ordeal and asked me what the hell just happened. When I explained, I told her that I've seen that rodent before, but it had never gotten so close to me before. He was always afraid of me. I asked my sister what she thought this was about, and she said maybe there was something more frightening than you outside. That night, I had trouble sleeping, and when I did fall asleep, I dreamed of him, this tall figure lurking in the forest in my home. And in my dream, my home shone a light into him, making him flee into the woods. Since that dream, I have never felt his presence again. But sometimes I wonder what made him go away. And why did he come to my house?